Well, welcome
I,
to the podcast. My name is Father Bill W. I'm an Episcopal priest living here in Austin, Texas. I've had the gift of recovery since December the 27th of 1972. I'm very grateful for that. We are starting now our second episode of what I'm calling an insider's view of the Oxford Group, and our guest to guide us is David Belden. He is the author of a wonderful new book titled The World Remakers Child, a memoir of activism and healing. And I have put a link to Dave's new book in the show notes, along with a free copy link to his doctoral dissertation that was done at Oxford University. And it's an excellent history background to what we're going to be talking about in this series. So if you get a chance to read that, I think you'll be well served. Dave, welcome back to the podcast. Good to see you again.
Great to be here. I really enjoyed the first round.
Thank you. Thank you. I did as well. I think we're having fun, and that's 90% of what this thing should be about. So I want to begin with one of the blurbs an author wrote for your new book. I thought it was a nice summary and be a good place for us to begin. So let me just read that. He says, David Belden's memoir is one of coming to terms with the shortcomings of the religious political tradition he was born into, while still honoring the meaningful intent of his forebears. And what was that? It was to build a social movement able to confront suffering at its roots and offer people a profound sense of shared belonging. His story shows us how we can embrace what is life-giving in our inheritance, heal what is wounded, and reach for truths greater than those passed down to us. I think that's an honest appraisal of your life and a good place to begin. Last episode, we talked at some length about Frank Bookman. He was the founder of the Oxford Group. Now I want to talk at some lengths about you and start with your family. I learned some things about marriage within the inner circle. That was very interesting, that the Oxford Group had, the external circle that most people saw, but there was also an inner circle. Your parents were smack dab in the middle of that, and that's what you got born into. Tell us about your parents.
Yeah, I was thinking about this, how to explain this to people in the AA 12-step world, because the essence of what Frank Bookman offered to people with addiction was a degree of liberation. It was how to find freedom from what had been running you. Lots of other people also found freedom from things that were not addiction. My granddad was a very well-known socialist Christian minister, congregational minister, wrote 42 books, had a column in The Guardian for 25 years. And yet his religion was not doing anything for my dad. And when my dad went to college at the age of 18, he went up to Oxford. He was very shy. He felt consumed with sexual desires, as any 18-year-old might be. But his father's religion had nothing for him. He heard about the Oxford Group and he thought, such nonsense. God is not going to help me with these sort of basic human problems. And then he read a book, which we mentioned last time, For Sinners Only by A.J. Russell. Lovely book. It's still reprinted, I believe, in the 12-step world, and it should be. He read this book and he thought, damn, those people I want to be with. I want to join them. And when he got back to Oxford, all kinds of very interesting, attractive characters who all found sort of their own liberation from their own difficult human natures through the Oxford Group. My dad went along and he said, all right, I'll give this a try. And the first thing he did was what you would call two-way prayer, which actually I never heard that term until from you. I'm sure it's there, and obviously it's there in the early Oxford Group literature, and I probably did read it when I did my doctoral thesis, but it didn't stick in my head. For us, it was called guidance. Having guidance was such a central part of everything in my childhood. We would sit down. I mean, my parents, every morning, an hour's guidance before they got up, which meant, reading the Bible or some inspirational literature and then sitting still and praying and waiting for God to speak to them, for the inner voice. So the very first time my father tried this in a rather sort of skeptical spirit, he had three thoughts, one of which was to visit a friend of his before class that day. And he said, this is crazy. This guy is going to be all busy trying to get to class. One of the other things was to be honest with his parents, which was a much bigger deal. But this was a smaller deal. Go and visit this guy. So he said, all right, I'll give it a try. He goes to visit the guy. He finds that he's very sick in bed. My dad was able to get him a doctor. And he says, my God, this stuff actually works. There's some higher intelligence happening here. One of his biggest issues was that he was painfully shy. And he told one of the guys in his college who was all into the Oxford group, he said, this is what happened to me this morning. I went and found this guy and I got him the medical help he needed. And the guy said, oh, well, you've got to come to our meeting. At this time, the Oxford group was very popular in Oxford University. I don't know if they had daily lunchtime meetings. They said, you got to come to the meeting. There were like, I forget what, it's in my book, way more than 100 people at this meeting. My dad was completely intimidated about speaking in such a situation. He said, no, I can't do that. And the guy said, well, come anyway. And when this friend of his said, well, tell us, Ken, his name's Ken Belden. Ken, tell us what happened to you this morning. Ken gets up and tells the whole story. And his shyness appears to have disappeared. For him, it was a liberation. And there was a comparable liberation for him from sexual obsession. It wasn't that my dad was sleeping around or anything. In fact, he told me once when I was probably, 10, 11 years old, he started to give me the sex talk. He said that he had never kissed any woman before my mother. And I absolutely know that he did not kiss my mother until he was engaged to be married to her. And then he was 34 years old. So he didn't kiss anyone until he was 34. So this was all in his head. Or, masturbation was a huge no-no at that time. It was supposed to make you blind and all kinds of things. So anyway, my dad found his liberation. The reason I'm saying so much about that is that the whole movement that I was part of was people who had found liberation in various ways. Often, in Frank Bookman's case, one of his biggest things he found liberation from was bitterness and hatred. For my mother, she had been raised, as she said, in tragedy. By the time she was 18, father had died, her stepfather, who himself had lost. So my grandmother married again after my grandfather died. This is not the Christian socialist grandfather. This is the capitalist grandfather. When after he died, my grandmother married again, a man who himself had suffered the tragedy of his two adult sons dying in the First World War and his wife dying. And so they got married, but this man only lasted a year before he died himself. So my mother had lost two fathers, and she had 5 brothers, 2 of whom had committed suicide by the time she was 18. My grandmother who was from the Channel Islands and very French. We called her grand-mère, grandmother in French. Grand-mère was going to be a concert pianist, and then young woman, she married this man who was almost 20 years older than her, successful man in London. She'd been raised in Paris. She came to a great big house in London on the edge of Regent's Park. And he gave her a grand piano, put it in the living room and said, your concert career is over and now you are going to have my sons. And she had 4 boys, one after the other. And apparently when they were small, she used to say to them things like, men are beasts. I never should have had you. I don't know what was going on in her marriage. She was a feminist of the angry type who doesn't actually get out there and join the suffragettes, as far as I know. I don't think that she was out there campaigning for the women's vote. But then she had my mother. And then finally, a couple of years before my grandfather died, she had a 5th boy. And my mother helped her mother to raise this 5th boy. And his name was Oliver. And I think my mother really wanted to give Oliver the love that her older brothers had not adequately had. So this was a family somehow steeped in trauma. And my mother was steeped in trauma. And then she met the Oxford group in her early 20s when she was starting to be a social worker. And it was liberation for her, liberation from, I think, from the trauma and pain that she had suffered. There's a whole long story, which is a fun story, but I won't go into it, about how my parents got married. My dad proposed 8 years before my mother accepted him. So they finally get married in their middle 30s. My mother is quite convinced that she will not be a good mother, that she doesn't have mothering in her. And she prays every day that she's pregnant. And when my sister is born, lo and behold, my mother discovers that she loves her. And this is just, proof of God's goodness and of how prayer works. And then she gets pregnant again. And this time she thinks, oh, well, it's actually a kind of natural thing. She explained all this to me in my 20s. I can tell you it was quite a shocking moment. She said, I didn't pray every day. And when you were born, David, I didn't love you. And for me, it was absolute revelation because I knew intellectually that my mother loved me, but I didn't feel it. I had never felt it. She was criticized, apparently, by her women friends for not cuddling me, not picking me up. I don't remember her hugging me warmly. One of the greatest moments of my life was nearly at the end of her life when she had Alzheimer's and she was in a care home, came to visit from America. And there she was, sitting on the floor, talking with her childhood friends. And people warned me, she won't recognize you. But I walked in the room and she looked up and she said, David. And she opened her arms and gave me the hug that I'd never had through my whole life. And I just thought, oh my God, it was there all along. Somehow it needed Alzheimer's to liberate the hug in my mother. It was possibly the sweetest moment of my life.
We gather a great many wounds, Jung said, in the first half of life. You can't avoid it. Some more tragic than others, and you were handed quite a load in your life. I had my share as well. And then the freedom that you talked about, Dave, that's what Jung said we try to achieve in the second half of life. It's coming to terms with those things.
I think my mother did achieve a great deal of freedom from her trauma, but not quite adequately.
Not enough. And what we don't, we pass on to our kids.
Yeah.
It's part of why we need to do this work.
So the thing I wanted to say that I think distinguishes the 12-step world from the world of the Oxford Group and moral rearmament, which is what it got called from 1938 onwards, was that AA remained very focused on the individual and the individual's healing. Maybe because addiction is so overwhelming. I don't know. Can't even speculate on that. But for the Oxford Group, they made the connection between personal liberation and what the world needed. They were in the Great Depression in the 1930s. They were in the road to war. Frank Bookman was convinced that this personal liberation that could come from allowing God into your life and doing your moral inventory and really doing all of that serious work, that actually was the key to international conflict or industrial conflict, to all conflicts. In fact, it was the key to getting employers to look after their workers and workers to work hard and do their bit. I think St. Paul talks somewhere in his letters about the organic nature of society where certain people are the head and the arm.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I think that was the kind of vision that was unspoken but natural to the Oxford Group. It was that if we all do our part, if we're all listening to God, God has a role for each of us. And if we all do it, then actually the world will work. And as Bookman said, there is enough in the world for everyone's need, but not for everyone's greed. If everyone cared enough and everyone shared enough, everyone would have enough. So it wasn't enough just to be your individual self. His big deal was strategically planning for how you would bring this personal change to the world. So that's what he created in the Oxford Group during and after the war. They got these big conference centers. They bought properties. I was raised in one of 7 great big London houses where some more than 100 people were living communally, listening to God together, all trying to work out their conflicts and issues together, but all in aid of reaching the leadership of Britain and resolving industrial disputes. I mean, for example, there was a 7:30 meeting every weekday morning across the street from my house, and the grown-ups, the adults, would all go if they could, apart from the women who were making breakfast. But my parents went just about every day. The kind of thing that would happen would someone would say, well, there's a strike down at the docks. They would lay plans. Who knows any of the strike leaders? Who knows any of the management? Or who knows the wives? Let's go and talk with some of the wives and just share with them about how we have sorted out problems in our own families. Family conflict was a big deal. Right. You can't cure war in the world if you can't cure war in the home, was one of our slogans. But putting that the other way around, if you could cure war in the home, Then you went to meet these leaders of the country, and particularly their wives, and talked about how they could sort things out with their husbands. And then the husbands would be more likely to sort things out with each other.
But Dave, there's also a war going on inside of you at this time.
Yeah, for sure.
And I want to stay focused on that because you get into that in some of the early chapters that you were raised in this situation, in this environment, and the emphasis was on being a good boy, the way I read it, and yet inside there was a very angry boy, and that's a conflict. It's tearing you apart. It took you many years, I think, from what I read, to get to the essence of that, to get down to the root of that. So you kicked a boy in school. What happened there?
This was a very puzzling thing to me. I was probably 10 years old, and there was this boy who I began to bully, seriously bully. I would go and punch him or kick him and then run away in the playground. I had no idea why. I don't think he had done anything to me. He was a bit of an awkward kid. He was like the classic victim. He was someone who couldn't stand up for himself.
Right.
And therefore, I was able to bully him. And I felt this incredible glee when I kicked him. I mean, it's a horrible thing. And this is only about 10 years ago, I was facilitating a group in San Quentin prison. And the guys were talking about how they had been introduced to violence. One of the sort of principles of restorative justice is that your first experience of violence is not when you do it to somebody else, it's when somebody does it to you. There's a sense that it's hurt people who hurt people. So I told them, this group, that I had been this bully when I was 10 years old. And they said, why? Who had hurt you? And at that point, I was 60 years old or something, and I had no idea why I had done that. I had suppressed it in my whole memory. So I really wrote this book out of a desire to understand why I had kicked that boy. And I'm not entirely sure that I can give you a good answer even now, but I think that the best answer I can come up with is that we were on this colossal mission to remake the world.
Right.
What we thought we were doing. And being good was my concept of how I could do that. So my mother, for example, who listened to God every morning, she had a little notebook where she wrote down her thoughts from God, supposedly from God, every morning. And sometimes she would tear out a piece of the notebook or she would sort of bring it to me, and it would be God's thoughts for David. And I absolutely dreaded these moments. This was things that I was not doing adequately and that I needed to go back to God myself. I was never punished, and literally never, no one ever raised a hand against me. It was not that kind of thing. It was that when I was being inadequate or selfish, I was told that I needed to listen to God. And the trouble was that when I did listen to God, he told me to stop being selfish. It was very annoying. I just felt like I had to be on my best behavior all the time. And if I wasn't, then I would get some of these little... So one of the words that was used in MRA, that's what we called moral rearmament in MRA, people were fighting for each other all the time. This word, fight for somebody. There was a quote from Dewey Howard, who was the wife of Peter Howard, who led the movement after Frank Bookman died. And she said to her husband, she said, Peter, I'm supposed to love you as you are, but fight for you to become the man God wants you to be. So this fighting for each other was happening all the time in MRA, which meant that we were all trying to bring each other up to the standards of honesty, purity, unselfishness, and love. That was our goal, and bring ourselves up to the challenge of listening to God and obeying all the time. And everything had to be done perfectly, and we were on display. It was like my father ran a theater where we put on these plays that were supposed to change people. It was also true that hundreds and thousands of people came to the theater after coming to dinner at our house. We had these big buffets for 50, 100 people in our big house. And I felt like we were on display. We were the theater as well. We were the theater showing the new world that could be. And I needed to be that person. I needed to be the changed person. And there was a huge us and them feeling in MRA. Right. We were the changed ones. We were the ones, the hope of the world, but the ones obeying God. Everybody else out there, they were all, they were failing to.
Element of pride in that, eh?
Yes. and tribalism.
And tribalism, that's right.
The cultic thing grew up in the movement.
Right. Yeah. And you were right at the heart of it.
This was the London headquarters.
Yeah, which might not have been shown quite as much out, in the outer edges of it, but more was expected of you.
Yeah.
And of your parents, too.
Definitely.
Yeah, yeah. And then all the stuff that doesn't fit in that gets repressed and pushed down. It's like a beach ball, and it's going to come up. A lovely expression that when someone was helping me deal with this stuff, it was to understand the unconscious mind. Sometimes I'd get drunk or such, and I'd say, well, forgive me, Charlie, I wasn't myself the other day. If Charlie knew what the hell he was talking about, he'd say, well, then who the hell were you?
Right.
Yes, I was myself, but I was a self that I was not in touch with.
Yeah.
And that has to be part of the deal.
Yeah.
To recognize that. Well, when I started going through therapy, they said, you talked about the bullying. They said, Bill, you're very angry. I said, oh, bullshit. I started a fight with them, See? I just was not in touch with my emotional life.
I'm sure that you're much further ahead than I am. Writing this book was part of my attempt to get in touch with my emotional life.
Yeah. Well, it starts with the fifth step, and you talked about taking what became your fifth step. You did it with your dad. I thought that was fascinating.
So remind me what the fifth step is.
Shared my inventory with another person.
Yeah, this was really a crazy thing. I don't know how many other people.
I don't know anybody. I don't know
anybody. No one in their right mind would do this. So I was 17. I was going to apply to Oxford University, just like my dad. And if I did, then I'd have 9 months before starting there because I would, for whatever reason. And so I needed to find something to do in the 9 months. And this man, Mahatma Gandhi, one of the grandsons of Mahatma Gandhi, who was leading MRA in India, came to this youth conference where I was in England and invited us to come and help him out in India. And I accepted. So now this was going to start my adult career in MRA. I was going to go to India and work with Mahatma Gandhi. And I realized, oh shit, this is the moment at which I actually have to give my life to God. This was, there's a lovely place in your book, in the Power of Two-Way Prayer book, where you talk, let's see, I made some notes about it. Talk about the self with the small s.
Yes.
And the self with the larger L, and how putting the small self in relation to the greater self, quote, feels like the death of the ego. And I was 17, I had lived so many years knowing that this was in my future, that I would, in a sense, have to do what St. Paul says. Oh, no, it's not. It's in Matthew 10:39. Those who lose their life for my sake will gain it. Jesus' point. You had to lose your life to gain it. And in so many meetings, I had been present in MRA meetings where someone would get up on the platform and say, I gave my life to God last night. And I thought, I'm going to have to do this. I'm going to have to lose my life. I'm going to have to lose my ego. It was really, really daunting and intimidating because I knew that then I was out of control. Then I had to obey my guidance all the time, that I would be God's puppet is the way that I think I thought of it, and no longer David.
I think everybody going through the 12 steps, and we'll get to this in the next episode, it's I'll become the hole in the donut. There'll be nothing left of me.
Yes.
That's it.
Exactly. So, but I knew I had to do it, damnation. So the way that we did this in MRA was I took 4 sheets of paper, which wasn't quite enough, but I started with 4, and I wrote absolute honesty, purity, love, and unselfishness, one heading for each sheet. And then I wrote down every damn thing I could think of in my life that I had transgressed these, which of course was both very long, but also unbelievably trivial because I was this good boy who I'd never, of course that was not trivial when I beat up on that kid. The reason that came to life was that his parents saw him in the bath covered with bruises. Said, what happened? And it all came out. So that was not trivial, but some things were trivial, but I wrote them all down anyway. And then, yes, the next thing was to share them with somebody. I didn't want to share them with anybody. I didn't trust anybody. I don't even quite know what went through my mind. Really, in many ways, the only person I truly trusted was my father. And by some coincidence, he was not at this. I was at this youth conference. He was not there, but he winged in for a weekend to visit my sister and me and sort of rally the troops. He was one of the leaders. And so I said, all right, I'm going to tell him. So we went to an empty room, sat on a sofa together, and I read him the whole damn list. And at the end, he said, all right, are you ready to give your life to God? And I said, yes. And we knelt on the floor, and I just wholeheartedly gave my life to God.
How did that feel at the moment? Do you recall?
Huge relief.
Yes.
I'd finally done it. And it had a very curious effect, which was that my father, in that talk, the sex talk that he'd given me when I was, 10 or 11 years old, he'd told me, never touch yourself down there, which I knew exactly what he was talking about. And so I never had. So I had got to the age of 17 without ever masturbating, which is a very unusual thing for most young men.
They say, David, 95% of boys masturbate. The other 5% lie about it.
I was the 0.0001% who told the truth. So I'd had these delicious wet dreams, and I didn't know if I should be guilty, if they were sinful. So I asked my father what our dreams about, and he said to me, they're a garbage disposal system. He wasn't having any of this psychology nonsense where your dreams are important. He said they're ways to get rid of stuff you don't need. So I thought, oh, that's lovely. All right. So it's not sinful and I'm free to enjoy them. So then I do this big fifth step, as you call it. And then in the course of the next year, my wet dreams dried up from one day to the next. It was in that whole year, I think I had 2. And it was like a biological miracle. It was like I was blind and now I see. It was like clearly these things were wrong, because once I gave my life to God, he took them away. So it was a kind of liberation. I had my own bizarre liberation. It was one of the things that led me to think, damn, God is powerful.
So you went off to India right after that?
Yeah, I went to India.
And how did that change you?
That was huge, clearly huge, because I discovered poverty for the first time. It wasn't as if there wasn't poverty in England. Of course there was, but I was a middle-class boy. And I'd known working-class people, but not anybody in extreme poverty. But in India, it was right there in your face. And one of the first big experiences I had was when I was asked by Mahatma Gandhi's team to accompany a woman by train from the north of India to her home in the mountains, not far from Bombay, or what is now called Mumbai. So this was like a 2-day or 3-day, 2-night, I forget. It was an endless train journey because she was a very low-income woman. She was a Dalit woman, meaning part of the lowest caste or subcaste in India. Her husband, he had joined the movement, and he had gone off to Europe with a group. And they needed someone to accompany this woman. And here I was, this completely naive, now 18-year-old English boy, knew absolutely nothing, accompanying her with her baby and her toddler in this third-class carriage that was so full of people that there were people on the floor. I couldn't put my feet on the floor most of the journey, and I wasn't able to sit cross-legged on the seat like everybody else. So my great embarrassment and shame, I had to stick my legs straight out on top of somebody who was sitting underneath them. I mean, I apologized deeply, and they all said to me, you ought to be in first class. Not that I understood what they said, but that was what they were saying. And then there were people on the luggage racks above my head. It was an extreme situation. In the course of that 2 days, I realized MRA is all about remaking the world. But is it up to remaking this poverty? What is involved in tackling poverty? What is happening here? I mean, I didn't know then, but India was the richest country in the world some 2 centuries before the British Empire discovered it and started to exploit it and destroy its basic textile industry and so much else. A lot of this poverty had been created by my own country's imperialism. I didn't know that, but I started to learn. What happened for me was that it started to turn me towards the left, because who was teaching and preaching the business of how you change colonialism, how you change capitalism, all of that. So I don't want to get into that right now, but that was the effect. So I go off to university, and it's just It's 1967, 68. It's the height of the student rebellion era in this country. It's against the Vietnam War. We were not in Vietnam at that time, there was a huge student rebellion in Paris in May of 1968. I went representing my college magazine, tried to talk to radical students, tried to recruit them to come to our MRA conference center in Switzerland. So I spent my 3 years at university really trying to recruit young people, the sort of attractive characters who I'd seen in For Sinners Only, that book. I wanted to recreate the Oxford Group, that sort of amazing discovery of the power of God to change people. I wanted to recruit the leaders of the left to that, had a record of absolute total failure.
But it's a very noble goal.
It's a noble goal. I was not trying to get a good degree, I can tell you that.
Right.
I just was trying to scrape through. I was so privileged in that sense. So you could call it privileged or you could call it inane. I didn't really understand that I was one of the luckiest people in the world to be given a free Oxford education. It was free because my parents were so low income. They didn't have salaries, by the way, working for MRA. Right. They depended on the gifts of strangers. My dad did. My mother had some money of her own.
Somebody once described the Oxford Group as the Salvation Army in spats.
Yes. So I don't know if this is an American expression. Someone told me it wasn't, but down and outs are the people on the street of the Salvation Army.
The down and outers.
The down and outers. And Frank Bookman said that his mission was to the up and outs.
Or the up and outers.
Yes.
Up and outers, yeah. So then you went to carry the message to Ethiopia. You went to change them, and they changed you. So you were ripe. You were ready to fall apart. I can feel it in your book that this is not going to hold. The center is not going to hold.
I became incredibly depressed about MRA.
Good. What an opportunity.
Yes.
You know, someone says they're falling apart. I said, well, welcome that. You know, now it's an opportunity to put it together differently.
Yes. It was because I cared so much, I think, about the poverty I'd seen in India.
Yeah.
Now knew about in England and in other places. And I was so desperately miserable that MRA was not going to have any effect on that because our movement, in fact, was now in decline. I had tried to reproduce what was happening in Oxford in my father's time, and I totally failed. We were not in sync with our generation. There was no way that. So I felt absolutely desperate. I thought, I've given my life to God. I'm going to have to do this for the rest of my life, and it's going to be fucking miserable. I'm going to be. This is endless struggle and no success. And I really felt suicidal. There was one particular night where I just longed to kill myself. And my 21st birthday happened shortly after this. My dad organized this wonderful event. And the next morning he came to me and he said, I'm so sorry. I forgot to call on you. There was a big dinner and speeches were given. Right. I forgot to call on you to give your speech. And I said to him, Dad, that was the best thing that you ever did for me, was not calling on me to give my speech, because I was in a panic about what I would say. I had nothing to say. And that's when I told him, again, this is like sharing my fifth step with him.
Right.
I was a very secretive boy, and I've been a secretive man about my inner life.
Right.
But somehow, for the second time in my life, I told my father something real, which was that I had been feeling suicidal.
Yeah.
And he gave me this book called The Christ of the Indian Road, which was about how Jesus can be a friend. And it was revelatory to me. I'd never thought of God as a friend. To me, God was the guy who gave you instructions every day. It was like who demanded so much of you, who maybe empowered you to do his will. But he was like the commander in chief. And because we were this strategic force, we called ourselves a force in the world, trying to solve international conflicts, prevent wars.
And we don't have time to heal ourselves. I can really relate to this. I was out trying to change the world in my own little way, but I was unchanged. And it just doesn't work. You get split. You get torn apart.
I agree.
Yeah.
I thought that I was changed. I thought that because I've been raised in Moriam, I'd done all the right things. Well, I'd done my moral inventory. I'd listened to God. I thought that I was changed. But
so do most people in the church.
Yes.
They think they're changed and they're not. And many people, I don't want to put AA on a pedestal, many, many people in AA think they're changed and they're not. So what is this essence of change? It's having this inside and outside come together. It's wholeness. It's not holiness. That's the essence of it.
It's deep stuff, Bill.
It's deep stuff, and you got to go deep if you're going to get there.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that we humans are quite a case. I mean,
quite a case. Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree. And your book is a wonderful description of the inner turmoil that's going on. It can't hold together. It has to come apart. So you go to Ethiopia.
So just to complete that, the Indian Road, I just felt it transformed me to think that I'm loved. Because it's all to do with this business about how I hadn't really felt that my mother loved me and that I didn't feel loved, as a...
Right.
But now I felt loved, and it was cosmic. It was huge. I felt... So then somebody invited me to join one of these MRA initiatives where one of the longest running wars in the world at that time, 1971, I guess, it was between Ethiopia and Eritrea. I won't explain all of that, but there was a guerrilla warfare going on. Eritrea was desperate for its independence from Ethiopia. And so I was invited to go to Eritrea, where a team of Ethiopians and Eritreans were trying to broker some kind of peace. And so this was my apprenticeship in the peace-building work of MRA. So I spent a year there. It was huge for me.
Yeah.
The sort of critical moment for me happened in Addis Ababa when I'd gone down to the capital of the country where there was a university where I was invited to meet with some Maoist students who were plotting revolution. Haile Selassie, the emperor, was still in control. They wanted a Maoist-type revolution on behalf of the peasants and the poor. I was very skilled, I thought, in MRA's language of a greater revolution, which was many communists had been converted to MRA. This is quite a story in itself, which I won't tell right now. But I thought, well, my job here is to convert these guys to a greater revolution. We were in this very poor dorm room with bunk beds and these intense young men. And I was trying to convert them to the greater revolution. And honestly, it did not sound very convincing to me. They were much more passionate. And I felt that they actually had right on their side much more than I did. I thought, damn, I'm actually doing the wrong thing here. I need to learn how to fight neocolonialism and dictatorship. This was a dictatorship in Ethiopia. And I'd studied history. I knew a lot about how democracy had been built in Britain and America and so on. I said, these people need a revolution. These students are right. There were plenty of believing Christians involved in the English Civil War. I think that my own ancestors were on the side of the zealous Protestants in the parliamentary army who believed that God was calling them to take down the king. And they did. And that was part of my inheritance. I thought MRA is so focused on individual change. We haven't actually understood what it takes to build democracy. You have to engage in conflict. I was inspired also by Gandhian nonviolence, but he's very clear that he was engaging in conflict, Gandhi. And so was Martin Luther King. And
so was Jesus.
Well, that's an interesting case. I mean, we could discuss that. I mean, he kicked the money changers out of the temple, but he was trying to bring down the Roman Empire.
Well, yes, he was. He was nonviolent. He was nonviolently trying to do it. It was the Roman Empire that crucified him.
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
We can have that conversation.
We will have that conversation because the elements are coming together for you. As I read your book and now you convey it to the listeners, you're on the path. How do I change the world? But because I think that has stayed with you all of your life. I'm just convinced of that. And I think that there's an element of that in myself as well. Anyone who's a true believer has that going on. And it's getting the pieces together properly. I almost interrupted you earlier when you were saying the two selves. To me, that's what's at work here, that there is the ego self, the small self, but it's being pushed and pulled and guided, if you will, by a greater self. And that's the capital S, you know? And I think that's in the heart of many of us. And it is a conflict, and one must align oneself with what? With love. With love. Your book comes down to that. Everybody worth his salt comes down to that in the end. How do I align myself with love? And that includes loving me, giving me, and those of us who had trauma in our backgrounds. That trauma has to heal. And that is part of our spiritual journey. Yeah. I have to be included in that healing. You have a line in there, and I loved it. You said, when I felt anger about oppression, it was always on behalf of other people, not me. You were repressed, and then you became depressed, and then you had to come to express it, which is what's happening at this stage of your life, Yeah. The two have to come into alignment with one another. How'd you become a carpenter? I love that part of your book.
Well, I was sent to boarding school, an inconceivable part of the British middle class experience, and also the British missionary experience. Missionaries sent their kids to boarding schools so when they went abroad, and I think MRA had a similar sort of approach. I hated my boarding school. I was supposed to bring it to God. God almighty, that was an impossible task. Possibly the best thing that ever happened to me at boarding school was in woodshop. I was given this big block of oak, big square block of fat oak, and I was told to make a bowl out of it. And I sawed off the edges and I got it on the lathe. And this was an absolute ecstasy for me. It was like putting my chisel on that thing, making a beautiful bowl. The time and the world went away. When they talk about flow, the experience of just losing yourself in a task, that was so gorgeous.
Your head, your heart, and your hands were coming together.
Totally. So later on, after I'd left MRA and I had been working on the left for some years, and I'd got married, and then she left me, and then she'd gone up north. She came from the north of England. She'd gone up to Yorkshire, said, I'm desperately lonely. Won't you come and sort of save me from myself or something? I was absolutely committed to this marriage. I was delighted. I went up and I had to leave everything. I was involved in all kinds of great world-changing stuff.
Yes, of course. I'd expect nothing less of you, David.
I gave it all up to go and live with her again. But how the hell was I going to earn my living? I got a job as an apprentice carpenter. I just remembered I thought I had a doctorate. I did not want to use that doctorate. I did not want to go into academic life.
Right.
It seemed like, God, no, I hated the very thought of it. I ended up becoming a carpenter, and that became my living for the next 20 years. And I'm not at all unhappy about it. I created some wonderful things. I did useful work for people. I rebuilt various termite-infested foundations.
I was listening for you when you talked. You used it 2 or 3 times. Created. We're meant to be creating something. If we're not creating something, we're missing out on it. But what we're creating has to be honest and pure and unselfish and loving. I think the Bookman's deal was right. It's how we go about doing it. And perhaps this is what I was reading into your life, into your carpentry, that you found that there. And it was beautiful. Some people find it in music. Some people find it in art.
Simultaneously found it in something else.
Yes.
Writing science fiction novels.
Yes, you did. Yes.
And the carpentry paid for me to take some weeks off every year to just write full time. That flow and ecstasy that I'd had making the bowl, I later was able to experience twice in creating these 2 novels that got published. That was a lovely experience. And I'd given up on all movements by that time. I thought, oh my God, movements are so hard. You get into these, people's egos are such intractable things and so exhausting. And I felt that, my first marriage had come to an end by then. And I just thought, God, marriage is so exhausting. It's so hard. It's such hard work. And then I fell in love with this American woman, Debbie, who I've now been together with for some 40 4 years.
Thank God for some of them, huh?
Oh my God, it was, I mean, we've had our difficulties, but to begin with, it was absolutely easy.
You're not easy to live with, Dave, I want to tell you. If you didn't know that.
I've certainly not found myself easy to live with at all. Debbie has not found me easy to live with often.
No.
It's true. But we have a way of, we really love each other and have found a way to work through our stuff.
Avoided having children for a while. I could relate to that. This world is too painful a place to bring another human being into it. Why would I ever do that?
Yeah, I thought that is one thing I can do for the world is not have a child.
Yeah, but you did. Rowan came along.
Well, it needed a big sea change in me. Gosh, this is a long story, but in short, I just thought this is not a healthy way. I felt that for me, it was not a healthy way to be. I thought blades of grass renew themselves, animals renew themselves. Everything is reproducing out there, the whole of life. I'm not going to join it. I'm not going to have that experience, that ancient human experience of parenting. I thought for me, I'm not saying this for anybody else, but I thought for me, in many ways, what was holding me back was fear of pain. Fear of the pain of loving my child and then discovering that he's what? I mean, so many things can go wrong.
Why would I open myself to that level of vulnerability?
Yes.
That's it.
And I thought, no, the essence of love and of life is to be vulnerable.
That's right.
And I just thought, okay, I'm going to do it. You know, it was hard to get there because Debbie had 2 miscarriages. But finally, we got there.
Yeah. Good for you. Good for you.
And I also read this lovely book, which in England had the title, The Rocking of the Cradle and the Ruling of the World. This was by an American psychologist who said, you're never going to have a world where women and men have more equality, where you're never going to bring the patriarchy to an end until fathers learn to be as nurturing of their babies and their children as mothers are. Mm-hmm. Then boys will grow up understanding about how nurturing is a male goal, male trait, and girls will grow up knowing that there's no barrier to them. They don't have to be the nurturers because they're alone. Of course, everyone needs to be a nurturer. That is, but if it's all been outsourced from men to women, then women are sort of stuck in this role where they are the primary caregivers all the time, and men go out and rule the world. And no, women need to actually be able to rule the world and do it with love and nurturance, and men need to learn that too. Anyway, it's a lovely argument.
If you'd look at Jung, this is, I think, what you're talking about is what he was talking about the inner feminine, that in man, there is a feminine side to us that needs to be developed. And in each woman, there's a masculine side that needs to be developed. And if we don't do that, we'll never become whole. So your book, Dave, at this stage, I was tracking with you throughout. You're growing up. You're becoming yourself, and you're doing it with great vulnerability. That's the beautiful part of your book. You expose yourself in ways that readers can relate to. We may come at it differently, and that's the great part about telling your story, isn't it? If you have the guts to do it.
Yeah. I love memoirs.
Yeah.
People are really
honest memoirs.
Honest memoirs.
Yeah.
Where we own up to our stuff.
You're a gifted writer. You resolved some of your issues on the religious end of things in the Unitarian Universalist Church, eh?
Yeah.
How did that come into your life? Let me ask it differently. What did that fulfill in you? Just like the carpentry fulfilled something, and Debbie fulfilled something, and Rowan fulfilled something. The church fulfilled something there, it seemed.
So I've been raised in this uber communitarian world. And then I had just said no. All movements and all organizations, I was done with organizations. I led a very solo life.
Yeah.
Solo carpenter. I wasn't even working for anyone else. I was working for myself.
Right.
Solo writer. There's nothing more solo than writing novels.
Right.
Solo father, parent. We got this lovely property in the Catskills where I built a lovely treehouse for my son. I mean,
You were near Woodstock, weren't you?
Yeah, near Woodstock. Yeah.
Lovely. I mean, any revolutionaries out there from the 60s will remember that.
I started to yearn for community. And so we were found at Rowan at age 8 in this rural area. Didn't have any little sort of, well, he had some oddball friends who liked Dungeons and Dragons and dressing up, boys dressing up. The very first time he went to kindergarten in the local school, he went with bunny face. He'd dressed up and painted his face as a bunny rabbit. This was absolute no-no for boys in the sort of hillbilly area of the Catskills. It was like, oh my God.
Good for him. He
was a San Francisco boy. We'd raised him in San Francisco and he had San Francisco values. Anyway, we wanted to know where we could find some friends for him, especially when his 2 particular friends that he did make friends with at that school were then homeschooled. Suddenly he was on his own. So someone said, try the Unitarians. They're full of oddballs, progressive types. And we went to the local church, the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of the Catskills. Just a lovely place. And that's what brought me back into community. I began to understand there are communities where I could enjoy. A friend of mine said this about the Quakers, but it could be said about the Unitarians too. He said that in his Quaker meeting house, they had a sign outside saying, come to the Quakers and have your answers questioned.
Right.
And that's very similar to the Unitarians. That Unitarian congregation was full of Jews fleeing from New York, but sort of agnostic and not wanting to go to the synagogue. It was full of ex-Christians. There was a bunch of Wiccans. There was, atheists. There were all kinds of people.
All God's children showed up.
All God's children. And we worshiped together. Our minister, I think, was brilliant. A woman called Linda Anderson. She led us in she had very Buddhist leanings. She was a Buddhist as well as a Unitarian. The meditations that we did in those services, I was just there for Rowan's sake, but it just grew on me in a huge way. And I could, in those meditations, I became aware of a sort of howling void inside myself. And that led me on to the next stage of my life.
What was that stage? You have a chapter, and we're going to get into this in greater depth, so you don't have to go deep, but you have a chapter on restorative justice and trauma healing.
Yeah.
And you write that was the hardest chapter for you to write. But can you tell us why? Why was that? Why was that so hard? Is that a vulnerability thing again, or what was going on?
Well, no, part of it was that, so I did like 8 years in various different prisons and
helping people. You didn't get locked up, did you?
No, I did not get locked up. I was learning how to facilitate sort of trauma recovery, restorative justice groups in which people went extremely deep into why did I murder somebody? Why did I rape? And the people were incredibly serious about this, and they really investigated their own childhoods and what had happened. To me, it was absolutely brilliant work. It was nurturing to me.
Because you were doing the same thing, questioning your own childhood. Yeah. You had to.
Yes.
I do two-way prayers. This is, I love this. I go to Jesus and I say, help me with this. And the answer I get back is, no, go talk to the kid. I can't help you with this.
Oh, you mean talk to your
my inner child.
Yeah.
Because that's where the wound is. And that's where the relationship has to heal. It's at that deep, deep level.
So I think what was difficult about writing that chapter was that I wanted to tell their stories.
Their stories, yes. No good.
Because that was the MRA way, was to tell their
That's exactly right. That's the church way, too.
And I showed it to a couple of my mentors in the field, both South Asian American women. They both said no. I mean, one woman went as far as saying, this is prison porn.
And that's a lovely expression. I like that.
What she meant by that, you understood it was like talking about what absolutely ghastly lives other people had led and debased they had been by those lives, and then how they were. I mean, people are intrigued to know what happens in prisons and in these recovery groups in prisons.
It's emotional voyeurism.
Thank you. Yes. And I thought, damn, she's right. I felt so cut up by that. I just thought, God, she saw this immediately, and I didn't see it immediately. And this, what's wrong with me? And, I mean, it was all
Yeah.
that. It was like, how the fuck do I tell this story? So she said, just talk about what you learned. I have not spent a whole lot of time in therapy. I've done it all by writing. I
Yeah.
mean, I'm a solo guy. Here I am,
Right.
talking to you and thousands of people in the world. This is a very odd experience for me.
But you're staying with it. That's what I love about you.
I'm trying to stay in the room, Bill. So, so, and in fact, having a sense of humor about all this is definitely.
Well, it's a requirement. It's a requirement.
It's a requirement. That is, in fact, the secret of our marriage, Debbie and me, I think, is we do a lot of laughing together. But anyway, in the end, I think I wrote that chapter. I'm sure it could be better written, but I think I wrote it in terms of what I learned.
You did. You did. And that's why it comes through. If you hadn't opened your soul to us, it wouldn't have happened. You've got a lovely quote in your final chapter. It says, what I don't know, which is critical, and what I'm looking forward to. And you've got a beautiful quote. I'd never come across it before by Howard Thurman. And he writes this, don't ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive. Because what the world needs is people who have come alive. And your book was part of your own emotional birth. I can just see your mom and dad up in heaven saying, yay, David, go for it.
So.
Go for it. And Bookman too. This is the revolution. The revolution has to come inside and then it can go out. My God, it's difficult to keep the balance between the two. So many people in 12-step get lost. They're out there helping people. And that's wonderful, but they forget to help themselves, or they do it to avoid helping themselves, to avoid going inside. However the hell long it took you to get there, my friend, I am glad you are there, and you are.
I don't feel that I'm there.
Well, that's how you know you are there. If you feel you're there, you're not there. All those people on YouTube who tell me they're there, I change channels pretty damn quickly. Look out for them.
So I know we're at the end of our time this time, but the thing that I really don't know and I'm looking forward to. I love that you picked out that Thurman quote. It's been very important to me.
It's beautiful.
But something that I really want to talk with you about is what it means for social change activists and activism, the movement work that is necessary to extend democracy, to save democracy in this country, which is under severe attack at the moment. How do we bring more personal change, personal transformation into our activist work? That is a big question for me.
It's a huge question. It's one that I kind of put on the shelf when I came into AA. And I took it down, maybe like yourself, in small pieces. I remember when I was going for ordination in the Episcopal Church. I was sort of your radical priest in training when I was in the Jesuits, I was arrested, in the March on Washington and spent time in jail and all that good stuff. And I was going for ordination in the Episcopal Church many, many years later. And there's a committee that the bishop establishes in each diocese, and they just want to make sure that no nuts come through. They want to weed out the nuts. They're the final thing. And for some reason, some woman asks me, Bill, do you plan to wear the collar when you are ordained? And I don't know what came with my inner kid. It kind of spouted out, well, only when I'm getting arrested. And I could see her eyes got as big as saucers, but I mean the truth is we have to confront our societies. We can't just be passive observers. But how do you go about doing that? Because institutions, they get corrupt so fast. So I'm with you trying to avoid them, but in the end, they can't be avoided. Right. We're going to get into that. Dave recommended a book to me, and I said, the last damn thing I need is another book. But I read it, and if you're following along, if you're an old hippie or an old revolutionary, out there. This is a wonderful book. It's called This Is an Uprising, Mark Angler and Paul Angler. I'll put it in the show notes. Do yourself a favor, get a copy. It's well worth reading. It raises some of the issues you're struggling with, I'm struggling with, and the country and the world are struggling with. How do you change the world? How do you bring love to it? How do you bring justice to it? You know, I had to go back and redo my whole theology. It just wasn't holding together, you know? And I had to find people who answered that question. And I think it gets answered theologically, it gets answered in psychological terms, anthropologically, what the hell was happening back in that first century with Jesus, you know? So it's multidimensional, and I hope the Buddhists are right that I have a few more lifetimes to come back here and get it right, because I'm getting close to the end of this one, and I ain't even close to it. So,
can I mention one other thing? This is about Paul Angler's work. This is from the book that you just mentioned, but there's been a recent article in Waging Nonviolence, which is a pretty wonderful website, and it's called How 12-Step Programs Can Help Build Healthier Movement. This is an article I would love to talk about with you.
We will get into this in some depth next week, all right?
Okay.
Next episode is going to be the 12 steps, how the Oxford group practice them, what we can learn. And then it's going to be what do we do with them? Where's God guiding us to go with them? So maybe we'll all become carpenters, get out our big blocks of oak wood, start whittling away, make a cross or something. I don't know. See where you're being led and where I'm being led, and hopefully our roads will join at some point along the line. David, thank you once again. This was, we always go longer than I think we're going to go, but I just can't cut it short. So what are you going to do? I'm an addict. So come back next week and we will hit it again. I want to thank you guys for listening. Thank David for getting vulnerable. He does that in a really, really beautiful way. And as I say, next week, I'm going to go through the 12 steps, but from an Oxford group perspective. Thank you guys for joining us. Appreciate your listening. God bless, and keep coming back. If I could ask a favor now, please help us spread the word about two-way prayer. Your donations, whether large or small, really help keep the lights on here, and you can now find us on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Giving a thumbs up and subscribing help us reach more people, and sharing this content with friends might actually help make a real difference in their recovery. Finally, the description below links you to our two-way prayer website and to our new book, The Power of Two-Way Prayer. So once again, thank you for listening. God bless, and keep coming back.